Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the City of Griffin Board of Commissioners April 28th workshop. We're glad to have you all here with us today. We'll begin by providing a project update on the construction of the new street between Ellsway and Blanton Avenue and discuss street naming and ribbon cutting date. Public Works Director Ms. Eller will address. Welcome. Good morning.
So I have passed out a packet, and this is what Ellsway currently looks like. So we are almost at the finish line of this project, which I'm super excited about. Electric is out putting the street lights in this week, so that should be done by the end of this week, and striping is scheduled to take place next week. I did want to let you all know we do plan on turning Blanton Avenue and North 3rd and this new street into a three-way stop. So those stop signs will also be going out in the next week or so. I did want to discuss planning a ribbon cutting with you all. So we are looking at the afternoon of May 13th or any time on May 14th or 15th, and wanted to know if you all had preference on which date.
Let me look at my...
I think going for closer to the weekend would probably get a higher turnout. That's what we're going for.
May 15th?
Mm-hmm.
I just got to look at my calendar. I mean, I don't...
I have to weigh in later. I don't know.
Yep. Okay.
May 15th is good.
Again, I don't until I look at my chaos.
May 15th is on a Friday. Graduation is the week after that.
So,
I have no idea.
I have to look and see.
Okay. We will look at some dates and times on May 15th, and I will send that information to Ms. O'Connor.
Okay.
The next page, the second page, we want to discuss what we are actually going to call this new street. So we have referred to this street throughout the project as Ells Way. But looking at the map, I think it honestly makes most sense to call it Blanton Avenue. So I would like to get a consensus from you all whether we are going to call it Ells Way or call it Blanton Avenue.
I'll take Blanton for
Blanton.
Blanton Avenue.
Blanton
Yeah, Blanton makes more sense.
keeps the confusion down. Looks great.
Perfect.
And they're wrapping up the sidewalks and all that stuff?
Yes, sir. All the sidewalks are complete.
Good. I'll run down there this week and take a look.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments?
Do y'all have any questions?
We'll get with Ms. O'Connor on a date that works for the team.
That sounds
Just to throw this out there is, the city commission meeting is on that Tuesday, April, the 12th. Was there any thought about doing it the same day as the commission meeting day, like at 4 o'clock or?
We can.
I mean, since we are going to put, that day's already on my schedule for city business, but
so May 12th.
As long as
yeah.
you think that it'll be done. Right?
Yeah, it'll be done.
So but I'll get with Mr. Connor. We'll
Perfect.
go from there.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, item 2 is discuss proposed amendment on Article 2 and Article 5 of the Unified Development Code, UDC, to provide for regulation of data centers by special use permit. Assistant City Manager of Development Services, Kelsey Carden, Director of Planning and Development, Michelle Haynes, will address.
Good
evening,
morning.
or morning.
Are you guys ready to have a good time? So I want to go ahead and let you know, I hope you've had the opportunity to be able to review those slides. I had hoped to get them to you sooner, but I figured the more information you have, the better. I did receive at least one question, and if there are more that you have that we can't answer today, I'm happy to go back and be able to email you. But hopefully we have all of our bases covered and have all of our data here to be able to go over everything. So I want to first start by a recap of zoning rules. This is as much for the public as it is for all of you, because majority of you have recently attended a zoning procedures training and have gotten this recap. So the city does have exclusive authority to regulate zoning within the city limits per the Georgia Constitution. That's subject to those zoning procedures rules that we talked about. This authority is not unlimited, though. We have to balance the property owner's right to freely use their property and the city's interest in promoting public health, safety, and welfare. So our regulation should be as strict as necessary to accomplish that, and we can't regulate or put in place regulations for any old reason. They need to always be tied back to public health, safety, and welfare. Data centers are considered a legitimate use of property at this time, and there is, although there have been a lot of proposals for the state to get involved with this regulation, as me and Drew have talked about, I believe that those may also be unconstitutional because of the fact that that zoning power is left with us. So for the time being, it is ours to regulate, and a decision needs to be made. You may have heard that there are some cities that are doing an outright ban. That is, in our opinion, also not constitutional. I do think that that's going to result in suits. The only ones that I know of that have done that already have active data centers and may have more of a defense than we would have, because they will be able to say, we have permitted one, and this is the only one that we are allowing, and we will allow no more. We cannot do an outright ban. From a legal perspective, I would not recommend that under any circumstances. So all we can do is figure out how to regulate them so that when they come, our citizens are as protected as possible, and that we're ensuring that public health, safety, and welfare is preserved, as well as the right for our citizens who are on neighboring properties to be able to freely enjoy their land as well, free from any nuisances. So I also want to give you a little bit of a definition for what a data center is, what the big deal is. All of you, as well as our citizens, are seeing them in the media. I think there is a lot of misinformation out there about data centers, but I also think that there's a lot of legitimate information, legitimate concern about data centers. So what a data center is actually a very complicated question, and I want to utilize our server room downstairs as an example. Under some definitions that currently exist in other jurisdictions, our server room that our IT uses to house the servers that I think actually help with the school system, sheriff's office, E911, as well as the PD and all city operations, including the emails that you guys use every day, those are all housed on servers that are in a room in this building. And under some definitions, that would be considered a data center use within this building. So that is why the conversation is very complicated, because when people say data center, they're thinking about the hyperscaled Amazon campuses that we're seeing being produced everywhere. And so when we put into place these regulations, we want to be careful not to over-regulate in a way that a legitimate use that we need for living in the modern world is completely canceled out or not permitted here. So at their core, a data center exists for the primary purpose of housing computer servers that store, manage, process, and transmit data. So they provided necessary infrastructure for the modern world. In hospitals, a lot of the conversations at the conferences that we have attended have noted that the AI that is being used for cancer research, that's made a lot of the large leaps in the last couple of years, have to be housed on very large servers. That includes patient files and data and scans for hospitals. That's a lot of data that you have to preserve for a particular period of time, and it has to go somewhere. For personal use, your cell phones, if anybody pays for an extension on their cloud storage, that is made available and made possible because there is out there somewhere a data center that is housing your data. Same thing for social media. So social media is obviously very broad. We use it for all operations, including coordination of city events and communication with the public. That importance cannot be understated, and in a modern world, it is a reality. That information has to be housed somewhere. And for government, we have requirements for holding body cams, dash cams, other records and applications as a city, sometimes forever. That information has to be housed somewhere. And as you know from our open records requests, we house a lot of data that we have to keep for an extended period of time. And we're not the only ones. Every other government or public entity that is subject to open records and retention laws has that obligation. So this is a reality of the modern world, and we need to make sure that we're being good stewards to note that, this is something that is needed. It's just a matter of where. The public opinion really does seem to be that this is our generation's version of coal, where it's needed to be able to operate and to fund and operate with commerce, but not in my backyard. So you'll hear NIMBY a lot in relation to data centers. The problem really for most people is that there's a significant use of land, a significant use of energy, and a significant water consumption. There are higher levels of truck traffic. I want to specify truck traffic during the construction phase, which sometimes can take years. noise, vibration, and other conditions that make it incompatible with some other uses, including residential use. So nobody wants to live next to a very large campus data center. But I will be very honest, it's not all bad. Data centers can generate millions to billions in revenue for communities. They provide funding for improvements to infrastructure, including roads, electric infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure, and school systems. So compared to traditional industry, there's little traffic post the construction phase. There's no chemical processes, and when they distribute their product that they have made here, it's through wires. So they're not utilizing infrastructure in the same way that another chemical industry or a paper mill might do so. So again, the sizes vary. That photograph of the server room is a pretty good depiction of what exists within this building. That is considered a micro data center. The power needs are much smaller. What I found really helpful in this is noting that it's approximately, I think, the size of one shipping container, compared to a campus or hyperscale data center, where that's what's running your social media networks, your Google, your search engines, things of that nature, and that can be around the size of 57 football fields, I believe is the largest one that is being currently built. So very big differences here, which makes it very difficult for staff to make sure we're not over-regulating, but make sure we're regulating to the proper amount. So to get to this proposal, we really had to go and do a deep dive on the UDC and find areas where our current code could be exploited. Right now, the UDC is silent as to data centers, so they could potentially make the argument that they could fall under light industrial, especially considering their transportation is is transmitted over wires. Their product is transmitted over wires. They could make the argument that they're just warehousing for servers. So this leaves us very vulnerable, which is why all of you did a moratorium on technological facilities in January to allow us the opportunity to be able to research this. So we did research into data centers at both a national and a state level. Me and Michelle both attended the Georgia Association of Zoning Administrators, the Gaza Conference in Athens, and there was a very informative presentation related to data centers that provided some context for what the options were when drafting this. There were site visits. Michelle, in particular, visited a nearby location in consultation with other local jurisdictions that either have them being built or that have active data centers. And as you'll see from this map here, that is noting the operational, the planned, and the under construction data centers in Georgia right now. Okay. So that information was actually taken from the Georgia Tech Energy Policy and Innovation Center's Georgia Data Center Ordinance Hub. Interestingly, I'm 99% sure that that entire hub was generated by a student using AI. So they pulled data and really did the innovation to be able to build a program that would pull all of the ordinance language in to provide context for people who were wanting samples of ordinances, both at a nationwide and at a local jurisdiction level. It is extremely informative, but that information was only made possible because of data centers in the first place. So that compiling of that information was only made possible because of data centers. Staff also collaborated. This is a multi-departmental effort between planning, water, wastewater, electric, economic development, stormwater, IT, and telecom. So our main concerns as we go in is how are we going to protect our citizens and encourage economic development at the same time? How are we going to balance those interests? That can be done through definitions. So that is defining what is a data center, and then through your zoning regulation. And at the Gaza conference, we really learned that there's three main ways that you can go about this. One, you can maintain your underlying zoning and make it subject to a special use permit where every data center would have to come before the board for evaluation. You could add a heavy industrial district, which we do not currently have within the city, or you could do a tech overlay in heavy industrial, and if someone rezoned to add that tech overlay, then they would be able to sell to any data center, and that would not have to come back before all of you. The other things are the same thing that we look at for any other zoning, which is your physical requirements, including your lot size, area, setbacks. How close are we to roads? How close are we to dwellings? The height of the actual structures, the buffer. Are we requiring a particular width of trees to be in between the data center and those residential dwellings to be able to protect against that sound and vibration concern. Design standards, including requiring HVAC and generators to be enclosed. What is the minimum distance of those data center generators, which are the primary complaint, from property lines where other neighbors are going to be able to hear it? Lighting, so the dark sky language, one of the main complaints you hear is that they are very bright. Sound ordinances, for me in particular, that's been the most kind of concerning thing that I've seen from both the videos and the feedback that we've had from other local jurisdictions, and even in the video that Michelle was able to film at a nearby data center, or at a, I won't say nearby, it wasn't exactly nearby, but at another jurisdiction's data center. So the other thing is the imposition of development agreements. So we actually already anticipate a version of this for light industrial. That's why we don't have just carte blanche light industrial development. We have planned industrial development, and it's intended to account for this development phase, for things to be developed in phases through an agreement with the city. We do stormwater management agreements all the time that are recorded in the deed records, and this would be very similar. So the main thing that people will also complain to you about is the utility concern. So this would account for water, sewer, electric, stormwater, any other road improvements that are necessary, impact to the local community, those costs being borne by the developer and them telling us how they're going to be good community partners. And then the decommissioning and bond requirement process. If they shut down, is it just going to be a blighted warehouse that's going to sit there? We want to impose specific requirements for restoring that site if they shut down. And if they shut down because they've gone bankrupt, we want to make sure there's money in the bank for that to be done. So now we're going to get into the actual nitty-gritty details. I will not go over every slide in complete detail, but I want to give you the basic idea. So our recommendation at this time, and this is the main framework that we're going to need feedback on, is that we limit data center sizes for now and require that this be done through a special use permit, specifically in our planned industrial development, which planned industrial development, if you look at the intent and definitions within our code, is truly light industrial development. And the reason why we're recommending that we not permit the hyperscale data centers at this time is that our code was not written for heavy industrial development. It does not contemplate heavy industrial development. And in order to add that in, and we did try, we would have had to make changes to about 6 different articles within our code that would have amounted to almost a complete overhaul. And as you know, that's already one of our goals for this year. And within the next month or so, we anticipate having that RFP out, and potentially in the next 2 months, having a contract before all of you for a consultant to be able to assist with a UDC rewrite. That process entails a lot of conversations with our community partners and stakeholders within the community, including the school system, our local businesses, potential developers, our citizens. And I believe that that's probably the better platform than just a public hearing for the citizens to give their feedback on what their concerns are, than just having a public hearing on our UDC amendment. We will get a much broader idea of what the community's needs are and whether or not the city of Griffin as a whole can handle a heavy industrial zoning district than what we can do at this time. So we are really asking that the special use permit process only be applied to light industrial, and for that reason, we're limiting the size to what we are labeling as minor data centers and major data centers. So a data center, for a minor data center, would be one comprised of a single principal building up to 10,000 square feet. That's your main thing here. Even that would require a special use permit. Now, excluded from that definition is anything that is an institutional use that is up to 2,000 square feet. That's going to exclude your hospital server rooms, the server room that is in this building. That is excluded from the definition of data center. We don't consider that to be a data center use as long as it is not there, or the building is not existing for the principal purpose of providing data centers. This building does not exist for the principal purpose of housing a server. So that's the difference. Our definition, it makes it where it's about the principal purpose, and it also cannot require a substation, so that's another factor for the minors. For major data centers, we are capping it between 10,000 and 275,000 square feet. Just to let you know, that's roughly the size of the 1880 Mills site. Okay, so when you think about how large of a data center that would be, you can think about the 1880 Mills site, and it's almost exactly 275,000 square feet. It sits on 53 acres, I believe. when we checked on Friday. And it may have a substation, but may not. So if it is only 15,000 square feet, it's going to fall into that major category, but it may not require a substation and may not be taxing on the electrical infrastructure. All of that is sort of resolved as a separate piece, but this lets us know what category of regulations they're going to have to comply with. Is there any questions on that before I move on? Because that's really the cornerstone of this entire recommendation. Okay. So, I pretty much went over all of this already, but I do want to note that it is only permitted in planned industrial development as a special use. So every application would go before the Planning and Zoning Board, and they would make a recommendation, and then it would go before all of you for a public hearing. So the public would have the opportunity to speak at the P&Z meeting as well as at your meeting. The board is always allowed to consider the unique impact and can impose additional conditions as part of that special use process, but also they have to, as part of this, pull a development agreement. They have to come to a development agreement with us. And a special use permit, and we've written it in this way, and would be altering the definition of special use slightly to account for this. If they do not have a permit pulled within 1 year of all of you granting that special use permit, which they cannot pull a permit without having that development agreement, the special use terminates, and they would have to come back before all of you in order to proceed. Okay, so that development agreement, I don't want to say it gives you another bite at the apple, because if you've approved the special use, there really should be a goodwill intention to allow those people to proceed with their zoning, but it does allow us to negotiate and ask for additional information, including traffic studies, what are you doing during the construction phase. It allows us time to be able to make sure that we have all of our bases covered, so that the impact that this has on the community is mitigated as much as possible. So the main physical requirements here for minor, the minimum acreage, and keep in mind this is minimum only, is 5 acres. Setbacks are 200 feet from the right-of-way, 200 feet from non-residential use or zoning district. So that's use or zoning. As you know, we do have some residential homes that still exist near planned industrial or near commercial development. And so that is intended to account for the fact that the City of Griffin is a little odd when it comes to proceeding with some of the things that we put into our comprehensive plan. And so this is intended to make sure those people are still protected even if their home exists within an area that is planned to be industrial or planned to be commercial. 1,000 square feet, I'm sorry, not square feet, 1,000 feet from any residential dwelling, and then a buffer of 100 feet in width. The building can be a maximum height of 50 feet, and if it is next to residential, 40 feet. For the major data center, the minimum acreage is 10 acres. Now again, those are 10,000 to 275,000 square feet. If you think about it in terms of 1888 mills, that is 53 acres. So just because it is 10 doesn't mean that they're going to be able to comply with all of these physical requirements and put a 275,000 square feet structure onto 10 acres. So that is just the minimum that applies. Again, the 200 feet from the right-of-way is the same, 500 feet from any non-residential use or zoning district, and 1,500 feet from any residential dwelling, a buffer of 200 feet, and the max height remains the same for both of those. Is there any questions or feedback about that? Because that's another area.
Back to 1888 Mills, based on the tax assessor's office, it's 459,000 square feet. So
We just checked that the other day. It has 2 buildings.
So if someone wanted to repurpose that building for a data center, would that be? I got 31, 328, 191, 913, and 236, 395 plus 119.
What the largest building is?
236, 395.
Yeah, that's the large, because it's one principal building. It's one principal building. Now, the other buildings
They're
could be used
staged
for
The
storage.
buildings are staged together.
There's two principal, and that one
So my
principal.
question is, would they be, if a data center wanted to repurpose that building, would the square footage be limited for them to be able to repurpose that building?
The 275 would work in any building that has the square footage for the 275. The exterior building could be used as the space where they have to enclose all of their other either equipment or any of their other accessories, because there is an enclosure requirement. And that is something that can also be applied there. So that building could remain and be used as an accessory, even though it's quite large. It could remain, but also the physical requirements are applying to new construction, and that's the same for any zoning. So we're not going to require that they, meet a setback requirement if they are already existing, they're already PID, they would come before you to get the special use at that time. It's your new construction. Okay. They would, however, have to comply with any of the enclosure requirements or modifications that would have to be made to the property in order to be able to satisfy this.
Water quality,
yes.
all
of the things that we have included,
okay.
yes.
So,
yeah, and that was a major thing that Michelle, I think, had to explain to me, because for a long time, I was thinking about our current properties in the context of these setbacks, and we had to think about it in terms of how we handle it right now, which is new construction is where you're going to have these setback limitations.
so that additional building at 1888, I assume is more than 25% of the size of the larger building that you're suggesting potentially house a data center. So I understand correctly, were you saying that it would be like grandfathered in, that they could still use that building? Or am I misunderstanding the 25% or less requirement?
Explain to me your 25% or less, what you're referencing.
It's not on here, but on the, how you rewrote that section, it said, any accessory buildings would be 25% of the main building or less in size.
That would be your new construction, 25% or less.
Okay, so it is.
Yes.
It would have to make the 25%.
Got you, thank you.
And we can make modifications, by the way, to that 275 in light of that site. That 275 is usually the difference that people are making between like a major versus a hyperscale, but a hyperscale is 500,000. So that 275 could go up to account for the structures that we already have existing, but right now it's one principal structure, and that was part of the reason for imposing the 275. Okay. So that language can be developed a little bit more. Okay, so next, looking at your design standards, we kept this where we're really just focusing on the highlights. The HVAC and generators have to be screened from the right-of-way and adjacent properties by walls, fencing, roof elements, or landscaping, and must be 100 feet from the property line. If you have an accessory structure, a lot of places are actually building these enclosures that go on the outside. I think the county may even require that they be put into an enclosure. The layout and orientation of the buildings and equipment have to meet the minimum physical impact requirements for those surrounding properties, and we do reserve the right to impose additional restrictions. You're going to see that throughout. We will always reserve the right for any category to impose additional restrictions, either through a condition at the special use phase or through the development agreement. No parking in the front, side, or rear setbacks. That's the same as usual, but there can be additional parking requirements. In particular, one of my main concerns after speaking with City of Fayetteville is actually the parking during the construction phase, because that is a major concern, as well as the access during the construction phase through potentially needing to build an additional road, but theirs is quite large. And then outside storage only permitted if screened from the streets, and with fencing of at least 8 feet in height. The development agreement, this is the other cornerstone of what I believe makes this process work. So they have to execute this before they're able to pull a land disturbance permit. So they're going to have to tell us that this is what they're going to do. It's got to be recorded in the deed records. It will run with the land if the person who gets the special use actually sells the property. This is how we make sure that we're covered. The core agreement is really just your term, your expiration, how long is this going to last, where are your easements going to be for your utilities, compliance with your max noise limits, including the potential requirements for on-site noise monitoring equipment. How are we going to enforce our noise ordinance? What is the penalty going to be against them through this agreement, in addition to whatever we are already allowed to do by law? Many of you may have heard me say before that the law is only as good as your ability to enforce it, and whatever your incentive is for someone to be able to enforce it. For someone who has a lot of money available, a fine doesn't do very much. So this ensures that we have some guarantee that we're going to be able to enforce a noise ordinance in a way that's going to make them listen. power and energy efficiency reporting, so that's going to cover a lot of your concerns related to utilities.
Ms. Ward had a question.
When you say, on here it said core agreement, term expiration of agreement, explain to me what that means.
So the term itself, a lot of times when you're doing a development agreement, you have it phased. And so a lot of times we may just say for like a minor data center, for example, we only want to set in place things that are going to control or be more restrictive during the construction phase. And then after that, we want to go to the standards that we already have in place, because it's a 10,000 square foot facility. So there may not be long-term, it's up to 10,000. There may not be long-term things that we're going to have with major that are going to want us, where we're going to want to have that development agreement recorded and extensive for that period of time. So the energy efficiency and reporting requirements, let's say it's 5,000 square feet, which is, I believe, a little bit more than the room space or the floor space that we would have here. I'll give you an example. The radio station upstairs is 2,777 square feet. That would qualify, if we had a data center living on that floor, that would qualify for needing to have a special use permit. Well, they're not needing to do development, so are we wanting to put in place energy requirements, or are we wanting to put in place construction requirements? So that allows you to be able to adjust that development agreement based on the actual needs of the property itself. For a major, it would be the term would exist until the use ceases.
According to what we're trying to put in place, if someone comes in and do a data center and they get all the permits and everything, is that data center into perpetuity, or is just a certain length of time that is used?
They do have a vested right. So at that point, once they get this development agreement, they do have a vested right. The agreement would allow us to gear additional regulations either during the entirety of that use, which you would be able to do that to say it is in existence, these additional conditions are in existence while it's being used, or for us to say we want to impose additional regulations during a construction phase, for example. And then the development agreement would terminate once the construction is done. That is often what happens with your planned industrial development, and then that's replaced by like your long-term stormwater management agreements. They would have a vested right to be able to continue to use that use if you granted the special use.
If someone or a company comes in and they get everything they need to do the data center, and after they made out as much money as they want to make, and they decide that they don't want to do it anymore, how does that work? Can they just sell it off to somebody else, or?
If they sell it to someone else and the development agreement is recorded in the deed records, then all of our development agreement requirements with that prior person would be imposed on and run with the land. So that means that it would be imposed on the person who bought it. But if they decided they just wanted to close up shop and they wanted to sell it to someone who wanted to use it for something different, the special use language that we're altering a little bit makes it where if it ceases to be used as a data center for a year, the special use cancels out and they've got to come back to you guys.
Mm-hmm. They can just sell and transfer to someone else and still be covered.
Yes.
The next person could still be covered under all.
They would have to comply with the same requirements that you came up with when you granted authority for that data center to be built in the first place. Yes. Yeah. Now, if they wanted to terminate the special use and they wanted to utilize it for something else, it would be evaluated at that time. But they would be able to utilize it for any other planned industrial development, which is the benefit of doing it this way. That was my concern with adding a heavy industrial development component, because if we add that and someone wanted to come in and they wanted to do a paper mill, well, we've now opened the door for that paper mill to exist on that site, and you guys may have additional, very different smell concerns, for example, related to a paper mill compared to a data center where your primary concern is noise. So that's why this special use process allows you to be able to consider the particular use as a data center. It is specifically for a data center, and if they want to use it for some other site, that property, without coming back before you, could be utilized for any other planned industrial development that they wanted to do within the guidelines of our UDC. But if they cease using it for a year, that special use permit is going to cancel out.
Okay.
And at what point do the decommissioning requirements take place?
That would be through the development agreement itself is where we would set the decommissioning language. So if they decided to close down and it's a heavy data center and we have imposed reporting requirements where they have to put a bond or money in escrow so that if they walked away and they decided they wanted to do nothing and we have to do decommissioning, at that time, we would be able to pull that money out of the bank, and we would be able to hire a person to go through and do everything that that company agreed to within the development agreement. You can set penalties and potentially even sue them for breach of that contract. So it works just like any other contract arrangement, but we did take the same language that the county utilized for decommissioning. I do have some tweaks that I would like to consider after doing a little bit more research the other day, because I do think that the decommissioning language is not necessary for like our minor data centers. So they're not needing to do soil testing because they're potentially on the floor of an office building. And so that's really the my only change that I would like to see potentially for decommissioning. I want to have the language in place if we want to utilize it, but potentially make it where we can gear it towards the actual needs of that minor data center, because otherwise we're going to prevent people from coming here because it's going to appear too cumbersome. But the decommissioning for major does involve reporting, testing of the soil, basically prepping it so that we could do economic development solicitation for anybody else who wanted to come here to use that site without having to wait for brownfield to be done. It would all be captured through that development agreement process that we negotiate with that person.
Are there any failed data centers that you guys found doing your research? Any that had to decommission?
There are, I think, Virginia, and I can provide you the exact location because there may be one in Georgia that just recently closed. It is not a campus, is my understanding.
Okay.
But in Virginia, there is at least one campus that I read in the Georgia Tech Ordnance Hub that they noted had a closure, and then how we are handling it through that decommissioning process is very standard for how other jurisdictions are ensuring that they're protected. It is not unlike any other industry. So it even though it seems very, very different, there are many ways where data centers are just like any other industry for a chemical plant, for example, where you do this type of development agreement and you put in place these decommissioning requirements and they put a bond up so that if they walk away, they are having to, you're pay to play, but it's really just reserve funds for if they violate the agreement with us. So our bases will be covered at all times. And again, that is developed after your special use is granted. You can figure out those details, and if they don't come to an agreement with you within a year so that permits can be pulled for land disturbance, that special use also ends there. So I hesitate to say if you have buyer's remorse because what they set up here in a public hearing does not match what they're presenting to you afterwards, you have the ability to stand your ground and say, no, we're going to put these details in our development agreement, or your special use won't be able to proceed, because it is a condition of the special use that they obtain that development agreement and tell us how they're going to protect our community. Okay, so to get into the actual more of the specifics, aside from the energy and the consumption of potable water, their performance metrics, the financial assurances, an ongoing assessment of the impact of the actual facility is one of the things that I like most, because if once they're on board, we're having issues that we did not anticipate, we can take those up at that time and say, hey, we need to have a meeting on what you're doing to address it, and we can require that they make reasonable efforts to address any problems that come up, including potentially if we have to mediate to resolve that, if it's a nuisance condition that we didn't anticipate. So we can always communicate with them through that process, always go back to that development agreement. They will also have to do an environmental impact study and operations management plan. There would be communication and certainty with regard to fire, public safety, how that property is going to be serviced, requiring them potentially to allow us to do trespass authorizations, or require them to hire their own on-site security if it were potentially needed, or if you had concerns based on the location. They also have to have documentation for utility infrastructure that includes the capacity and the required upgrades and cost allocation for that. So if there are upgrades or project-related improvements that have to be made, we can, through that development agreement, say that you have to pay for these things. If we have to, if a road is going to have more wear and tear, we can actually discuss with them on a particular annual investment during the construction phase where they're going to contribute funding because they're the primary person that's making it, we're having to do more maintenance on that road. All of these things are possibilities for what you can put into the development agreement, which is what it makes it so great, because we basically can utilize any of the possible conditions we could impose to gear it towards the specific use and the specific location and the needs of that location. The emergency generator testing, this is a big one, because when people talk about data centers being loud, I, previous to working on this, thought that they were talking about the servers themselves. The vibrations from the servers apparently can be quite loud, and the heat from that is a big factor in some jurisdictions, but it's actually the generators themselves that are causing most of the complaints. Your noise concerns, the fact that when I go outside on my front porch, I'm hearing a constant hum. And it's because people didn't put proper generator regulations in there. So you'll see that we have imposed a requirement that the generators can only be used for emergencies. An emergency does not include them trying to do supplemental power for themselves if they are required to do that, or not even required to do that. If they just want to say, we want to save money this month on our electric bill, they can't use the generator. It's for a max of 2 hours a day, and aside from that emergency use, it's a max of 2 hours a day for the testing. So they would be allowed to, if Georgia Power were the electric provider, and Georgia Power puts in place a mandatory shed requirement to say that we're running low, the data centers are going to get shed first, those generators are going to be used around the clock. And if they cannot do that, they will not come. So that is something that's a reality of them operating, because those servers cannot go down. So what we have to do is put into place requirements that are going to make sure that our concerns related to sound and related to the environment are covered. So that includes requiring Tier 4 generators. That's the same thing that the county requires. It's what the EPD requires for any of their large industries, because they have the best air quality rating. But they also are not as loud. And that's one of the things that was mentioned at Gaza, that a lot of the problem with data centers existing in Virginia is that they were utilizing old technology, and they recognized that they needed to improve that, so the generators themselves are becoming quieter. We're also including the screening requirement, the buffer requirement, and the enclosure and distance from the right-of-way that those exist. So if it was a true emergency where they had to be shed, they would use around the clock that generator. But they can't just say, I want to save money on my power bill, so I'm going to switch to utilizing this generator. And that's a huge deal in some of the complaints that neighbors are having, because the 60 decibel limit is, from what Brandon kind of pointed out to us, is really at the level that I'm speaking right now. Just normally, that would be what you would be able to hear from the property line. So it is still quite loud, even though it does not seem that loud. The tree and buffer requirement will help with that, but community-wise, that seems to be one of the main concerns that people have, is that the use and enjoyment of their property is really encumbered because the noise is constant if they are allowed to use generators all the time for any reason that they desire. They do have to let us know how the project is going to develop, how it's going to contribute to development of the community surrounding the project. This is vague on purpose, because to me it depends on the particular complaints that you're getting from citizens who are in that area. So are they going to do any sort of community benefit packaging? Are they going to fund infrastructure upgrades for the roads around there? Are they going to do any sort of reinvestment strategy where a particular amount of their money is going to go to the school system? All of that is intended to mitigate the impact on public health, safety, and welfare. So anything that is tied back to public health, safety, and welfare could be included as a requirement for their community benefit packaging. That is really up to negotiation, and it would be something where they come to us and we say, what are you willing to do? These are the citizen concerns. And they can present unique proposals to you that may potentially be, we're going to pave your road for the next 5 years. I mean, that's a reality of what these data centers are willing to do. Now, our smaller ones may be less willing to do something on that scale, but their impact is also significantly less than a hyperscaler. And then also, they have to let us know about the use, storage, management of batteries, fuels, backup power, and any other hazardous materials, and come up with a preset arrangement with fire, EMA, and other public safety related to those things. I did get a question from Commissioner Wright related to the additional fire needs, and after speaking with Chief Hamilton, he indicated that there really would not be any additional fire needs or concerns, equipment related or otherwise, with the exception of the storage management of batteries and fuels. Aside from that, they're very generic, considered like any other industry that you may have. All right, the next is the studies that we are going to be asking for in the drafting of that development agreement. So I'm pointing out all of these possible options, but how do you actually determine what's needed? And that is through these assessments that they're required to pay for and required to provide to us. So that is a noise impact assessment. How are they going, what amount of noise are they going to generate? How is it going to impact the neighboring property? Water consumption and sustainability plan, energy consumption and sustainability plan, a lighting plan, a stormwater management plan, and then your sewer plan. That's for minor. In addition to those, we also require or have put into place to require a transmission line impact assessment for your major data centers. We can require additional ones. That's built in. So if you want to include a traffic study requirement related to the construction phase, you can impose that as part of the development agreement. You can also impose the requirement that you want these in place before you grant the special use. It is entirely up to all of you. If you want to impose a condition and you want to say, we want to table this until we see a traffic study. We want to table this until we see a noise impact assessment. They need to be prepared to provide that. But I want to caution you that a lot of times what happens is you have a company that sees a piece of land, knows that a data center may want it, and does the work in advance to get that special use, so that when they have the data center come to the table and purchase the property, they can negotiate those details and what their needs are at that time. So it really depends on the circumstances, but you could stand your ground and say, I want to have these assessments before we are going to issue the special use. That just may not work for every person that comes before you, okay?
For the major data centers, do you think it isn't necessary for an emission study? I know that some data centers, after they're constructed and begin operation, the area has an increased level of CO2, and of course that can lead to cardiac problems.
So the development agreement itself does require them to provide an environmental impact summary and operations management plan. That was that is really built into a requirement there. I did say for minor data centers that all of those factors that are for the development agreement must be considered, but you can note in the development agreement for a minor data center that these were considered and deemed that they weren't necessary for the minor. But that is a requirement that is built into the development agreement portion. But you could always require it, again, at the special use phase as an additional condition. It's been drafted to accommodate that.
Might add to Commissioner Fuller's statement. I've read a lot of these ordinances they're basing their work on, and also have read numerous articles up till even this morning, listening to the news media talk about data centers elsewhere in Georgia. Emissions as far as radiation or UV or something like this virtually is not a factor with this type facility. I think the detriments of the noise and the energy consumption that are being addressed.
And the CO2 comes up with regard to those generators. So that is a lot of these data centers are being built. What they want is they want access to transmission lines that are already there, and then they want access to gas, so the gas lines. So they're looking for property where both of those exist side by side so that they can construct. And when you don't have this language limiting the generators, they get you to build their power until they can get an agreement with the gas company, and then they switch completely to generator power based on and use that gas. And that's where you're having those high CO2 emissions. To cover our bases, where you're not allowed to use the generators as your main primary source of power. And then on top of that, you have to use a tier 4 generator, which is the one that produces the least CO2. So that's really where we're trying to cover that and loop that in.
Great, thank you.
your lighting regulations. So I believe that electric was so pleased with these that we may adopt these for other areas and not just data centers. So our language that we put in here was taken from Dunwoody. It's actually applied to every industry, and I do think that there are a couple things in here that are more specific to data centers that they tweaked a little bit. But all outdoor lighting has to be a full cutoff type fixture. It has to be located and aimed to minimize glare and stray light across the right-of-way. Light poles have to be limited to 25 feet. The color temperature must not exceed 3,000 K at the source. That's your light. What does the light look like? So your temperature of the lighting. The maximum foot candles, and you're going to have to actually explain what the foot candles are, but I believe that it's the shadow casting that they do on the ground, Jason?
It's not the shadow, it's the amount of light.
The beam mount. Okay, the beam mount, not the shadow. And those are measured with a device. So this is not just, you come up with it yourself. So if they're abutting a residential use, it's 0.5. If they're abutting an office or institutional use, it's 1.0, and abutting a commercial or industrial use, it's 1.5. All of these should be geared towards keeping the sky darkness pretty much equal to where it currently is. So we don't want anything illuminating the night where people can't see stars. That's the main idea. And you want to prevent light trespass that are onto other properties, especially residential, to the fullest extent possible. At the same time, we did provide different foot candle requirements for off-street parking, and that's from a safety perspective. So the maximum permitted is 8.0, the minimum permitted is 1.0. Security lighting has to be aimed at the actual target location, and it should be a sufficient manufacturing quality that it's not just going to automatically activate because a car pulled into a driveway on an adjacent property. They have to provide a concept plan at the initial application, and I believe we already require this for the majority of our developments anyway, and then a full plan at development review. This is also photometric data from their manufacturer, so we want to know what they're using specifically in these plans. We can also, again, require additional lighting regulations as a condition of that special use permit or as specific for the property. So if you have all the neighbors surrounding this, whether it be commercial neighbors or residential neighbors that say, I have huge concerns about the lighting here, you can impose additional requirements to capture and deal with those concerns of those citizens. More specifically on the noise regulations, we put our maximum noise output at 55. It is 60 for majority of the ordinances that I have seen, but 55 was in a few of them. That is between the hours of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then 45 decibels at all other times. That is for property lines adjacent to residential. Generator testing is only allowed between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, no more than 2 hours a day, not allowed on a city holiday. And with the exception of testing, it's limited to temporary or emergency generator use. That temporary is meant for testing. So they cannot use it as prime power, and they can't use it for storm avoidance. So they need to be prepared to have their generators kick in automatically. They can't just say, a storm's coming, let's turn our generators on, because we know that we're likely to lose power. They need to have a sufficient process in place to have their backup generator kick in automatically. And again, additional noise regulations can be required. The noise during the construction phase, which has been a complaint I believe that has also been made in Fayetteville, is going to have to comply with our usual noise ordinance requirements. So all of those requirements are for post-construction. As a quick reminder, and this was a big point of confusion even I think for us as staff, for electric and telecom in particular, they do not have to utilize us to be their utility provider. They can be in communications with Griffin Power about whether or not we would be able to provide this location power, but it's not required, unlike with water and sewer. So the regulations here that we have in place are not the ones that we would impose as an electric provider. Okay, the ones that are in the ordinance are not the ones that we would impose as the actual power provider. That would be subject to a separate agreement where they would have to agree to all of the things that MEAG requires. And those don't necessarily belong in the ordinance because Georgia Power may have additional or different requirements than what we have. So if we were chosen as the electric provider, We would have that separate agreement. We would require adherence to MEAG power high-density load requirements as applicable. That may not be applicable for minor. MEAG would have the final approval of the end user. We would require that in the event of a mandatory load shed, high-density loads would be shed first. We would reserve our right to suspend service if the appliances were altered or changed, which is the same as any other facility that we provide power to. And then we would have to require permission for ingress and egress as well as easements as part of those plans from the get-go, because we need to be able to access the property to be able to put in our equipment. And then other technical requirements that may be imposed, and Jason can provide more information on what those might be. So there would be that separate agreement in place. The development agreement itself would require that they provide us with that agreement, showing what they're required to do by their power provider, whether it be us or Georgia Power. These are the requirements for the electric supply that are specifically within the zoning ordinance. They apply to anybody, whether it is us or Georgia Power that's providing them, and have to be in place in order for them to have the use. So prior to issuance of land disturbance, they have to provide us with a letter showing that they have someone willing to provide them with power. We need to know all of the restrictions and limitations that are going to be put into place. So we need to know automatically, is there going to be a mandatory load shed requirement? That may impact the generator conditions that you want to put into place. We can require a power impact study, phasing plans, and the full agreement with the power provider. There is no primary on-site power generation permitted at all, so they can't build their own power plant. I don't think that will be a problem for the sizes that we're dealing with, but it's in there. Substations are going to be considered accessory uses if one is required for a major data center. If they use Griffin Power, they have to enter into that separate agreement. They have to provide a utility inventory showing all power lines, infrastructures, and easements, and an energy consumption plan, lighting, and transmission line impact statement if they are a major data center. And again, additional regulations if you guys all deem that they are necessary. I know that that's a big one, so do you have any questions or concerns that have been brought to you related to power outside of the consumption? Okay.
Even if they're getting the energy from someone else other than MEAG or us, they still have to provide. We have to know what they're using. Is that
yes.
what?
And what the limitations are of that use. So we need to know what Georgia Power is going to require of them. Do they have a mandatory load shed requirement, which I'm pretty sure all are putting that in place. Yeah, Georgia Power is putting that in place as well. So we want to know the conditions and limitations by which Georgia Power is agreeing to provide them with power.
And Georgia Power will be allowed to come inside the city limits to provide power?
Yes, because of the actual size of the energy load. So just like with any other commercial or industrial use that is over a certain level of consumption, they have the choice. Yeah. The Territory Act provides them with the choice. So that's state law. Okay. And then for water and wastewater, they have to be served by public water and sewer systems. They cannot utilize wells to provide water for any purpose. Open evaporative cooling is prohibited, so you'll hear a lot of people talking about closed loop system. That's what this is intended to do. As we do our UDC rewrite, though, we are also going to consider and do more research on potential for gray water use. And so that is a conversation that we'll dig more in depth to with Brandon, but I just wanted to let you know.
Did you say rainwater?
Gray water. So that's your waste. I don't want to say it's wastewater because it's not wastewater. Wastewater plant effluent. So it is really not going to be the subject of this conversation today, because right now our entire ordinance and what we currently do is not built for this. So there are other modifications that would have to be made to permit that. But it is something that, based on some conversations that Brandon's had, we're going to look at when we do that UDC rewrite to see if that's something that we want to be able to permit. But I just wanted to mention.
I have one question. On these plants, does the water that they use have to be treated water?
No, and
Okay.
that's the question for the gray water.
Okay.
So
All right,
that's
we'll
why
talk
that
about it later, but
conversation
I'm
has
just
come up.
curious.
Yes, so it does not, and that's where the gray water conversation comes in.
Okay.
Better understand, the chances are pretty good we would not be able to serve just raw water
Mhm.
the way we're currently
Mhm.
plumbed up, I guess you could say. Piping system is in place.
And that's part of why I think Brandon's going to take a look, see if is there anybody else doing it right now, and if they are. But the closed loop system requirement is pretty standard, and it's an expectation that I think the public has at this point for how they're going to operate because of the environmental impact. I think Flint River Keepers are going to be very pleased, at least, that that information is in there. We have to fund and implement, they have to fund and implement all necessary water and sewer improvements that might be required. They have to do an analysis of all raw water needs, including the quantity required, and have a letter from Brandon indicating that we have capacity. So that has to be provided. Actually, you can require that at the special use phase. So we do want to talk about, we do want them to provide information and talk about monitoring long-term what their impact is on the community. So that is something that we can bring up through the development phase, but it is a requirement for them to talk to us about their monitoring of their water consumption and being able to provide reports to us so that we're being as transparent as possible when the citizens want to know how much water is this location using. So they would have to provide essentially a waiver saying you can know about how much we have utilized.
What, ahead of time, would they, according to the size and everything, would they have to, like, do a water contract like anybody else?
Yes. So just like the electric, that there would be a separate agreement, or you can include that into the development agreement as an exhibit because we would be the provider. That is an option. I prefer to do them separately, personally.
I mean, like any other business, we measure the water, the usage. It wouldn't be where we're going to sell you this much water. You know, it's not going to be that kind of thing. It's just like any other business, whatever they use.
Whatever they use is what they pay for, but we do have to tell them that we have the capacity that they've told us that they anticipate using.
Okay.
Okay, and then for stormwater, just like anything else, we're requiring a stormwater management plan. It has to be designed to address runoff from large impervious surfaces, which data centers very obviously have. It must comply with all cities' standards related to land disturbance during the construction phase, as well as the operation afterwards. They must incorporate best available and feasible practices, including green infrastructure measures, as well as low-impact development techniques. Post-development runoff must meet or exceed pre-development conditions and minimize downstream impacts. So their stormwater management plan needs to be built with that goal and obligation in mind. And again, we can impose additional terms and conditions related to that, either under special use or the actual development agreement.
I'm curious, Dicker. How we do our customers, you know, we charge them for the water coming in and then disposal of the water. So how would that work? The same way?
As of right now, yes. It's water and sewer.
Mm-hmm.
So the other environmental regulations, I mentioned this before, they're required to use Tier 4F standard generators. So this is EPD's lowest emission standard for generators. It's more eco-friendly, and we can impose additional environmental conditions if necessary. And that could be based on your location, if they have a particular topography that's going to lead to more stormwater runoff that we have concerns about. If they're in close proximity to any environmentally sensitive areas, we can account for that through this process. And then lastly, decommissioning. So again, this is the area where I would like to see a little bit more tweaking to account for the fact that a minor data center is not going to have the same decommissioning requirements as a major data center. So this was taken from the counties with a few adjustments that I made that aren't really relevant to the actual operation of it. But their plan should include a timeline of the decommissioning process, the equipment and material removal procedures, their hazardous materials management plan, a site remediation plan, including for soil and groundwater testing. We want to make sure we're not dealing with a brownfield lot that we're going to have a hard time with, Jeremy Stratton pushing off from an economic development standpoint because someone has to do a lot of remediation work. A site restoration plan, do they want to demo the structure? Are we going to require that they demo the structure? Do they need to revegetate if they have a certain amount of the trees taken down? Do they have to do landscaping on the site afterwards? Any other health and safety measures such as dust control and noise reduction during that decommissioning process if there is a demolition of the building, and then compliance and reporting progress reports. And then the compliance monitoring afterward can be conducted through regular inspections to verify those activities, progress reports, where if they have to actually move a deadline or a timeline that they gave us previously, we want to know, are you deviating from the plan? a final report evidencing when they are done so that we can then go back out and potentially market that property through our economic development department. And we want to see as a final report what their community impact statement was. So if we have someone come here and then they leave, we want to know what did they do when they were here in all capacities, not just from an environmental perspective, but from an economic development perspective, from a community benefit perspective. I would like to know all of the information, as well as their water use. That's another factor we can add in. And then the decommissioning bonds are going to be required. I would still like to require these for even your minor data centers, but the amounts are going to be very small by comparison. But I think that that's smart to require of any light industrial use, which is what our UDC anticipates already for planned industrial development. So the decommissioning bonds have to be used to cover costs for decommissioning, removal, remediation, and mitigation of any impacts on the site. The bond amount is determined by us based on all of the factors that we have to be able to consider. And the adjustments can be made per the agreement. We would have to put in information to note, when can we reevaluate when the bond needs to be increased. As you know, in the last 5 years since I've been here, the cost of construction has gone up significantly, and that is going to have to be factored in for adjustments with these bonds. And this is, again, the area of the proposal where I anticipate the most change. So if you do have any feedback or happen to see another ordinance that you like that deals with smaller, that's really where I'm going to be doing the most tweaking to dial back the decommission requirements for minor data centers. The county doesn't do that because the county doesn't consider what we are calling a minor data center may not be considered a data center with regard to the county. It's not clear in my opinion. So that's where we differ is the definition, and that's where a lot of your ordinances, you're not really comparing apples to apples. So I want to look at a couple of more areas to see if we can make it where we're accommodating those minor data center uses. Any additional questions or feedback?
I don't know. I heard y'all talk about the 1888 mill, and I know that's kind of like on the outskirts of the city. But just to your recollection, are there any, I know we pretty much know a lot, any parcels of property within the city limit where one of the larger data centers could possibly be located?
With some zoning work, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
when you say larger, do you
possible
mean-
annexation.
Yes, that's exactly what I was trying to say without using the word.
Annexation from the county, that would still be on the outskirts of the city.
Yes, there are larger parcels that abut parcels in the county that, if annexed, would comprise a large enough tract to actually allow for a hyperscaler. So that's my next question. Because that does exist, as of right now, the agreement does not provide for a hyperscaler. So if someone wanted to, annex property and annex 110 acres and do a 600,000 square foot data center, as of right now, what we are doing would not permit that. Now, again, the plan is for us to speak with the community and figure out through our UDC rewrite whether or not that's functional or possible, or do we want to, allow for heavy industry with the anticipation that it would require bringing in more land, or do we want to keep it where we have it right now? So that's really the question. One of my main questions is, do we want to say no hyperscalers right now, limit to 275,000 square feet? Do we want to increase that 275,000 square feet, but still not have true hyperscalers, which is 500,000 or more? Or what, because we could really, we could have people who
So
may
we could have
approach
a tier
us.
3. One, we've got the minor, the major, and then we could have a super.
Yes, and that is really what we anticipate looking at when we do the UDC rewrite. That's currently the plan based on this proposal. And that's just because when we tried to do that with heavy industrial, there are so many other areas of our code that would have to be cross-referenced, and our code is not built for heavy industrial, it's built for light industrial. So the fear is that we're going to miss something and end up allowing another heavy industrial use at a location that is going to have more impact than what we are anticipating with regard to data centers. So the risk is that if we open the door, we could open the door to something other than data centers, and we're not built to regulate for that. So we're all in the mind of thinking about what's needed for a data center, and I know noise, I know the concern is water consumption, I know the concern is generators, but if we go and we add a heavy industrial district without doing a complete rewrite, there may be areas where a paper mill is really the best example I can come up with that sticks to high heavens would want to come in and exploit that opening for heavy industrial, and we may not have accounted for that here. In order to account for it, we really truly need to do a rewrite and have a consultant to make sure we're covering those bases. Now, we can do it, but the recommendation is not right now, but we will have that within the next fiscal year, the UDC rewrite will be done.
But what I think I hear you saying is, we don't have within the city limits that kind of property, and the only way we would be do something like that was annexation, which was not likely. Because if, my thinking is that if the county thinks that it's something they might be able to get and that we were interested in, there's no way that they would. Anyway, what I was thinking about, like parcels of property like the Rushton Mill property, is there a possibility? Is that still zone industrial? Planned industrial?
You know off the top of your head, I'm pretty sure it is.
I've got it right here. The issue there, though, would be the potential of a residential neighborhood being right
Yeah.
next to it, so it would.
That's what is so interesting to me, that you really, this process has made me think about like the history of Griffin. I always try to go back to that when I think about zoning. The reason why our code isn't built for heavy industry is because heavy industry came here and left. And because it was a mill, the residential portion was built around the heavy industry because that's what was needed at that time. And so we're in a unique position where the sites that would be most functional are surrounded by residential, and heavy industrial of this type may not actually work with how our layout of our city is currently set up. We're dense because of the way that the mills were built and the way that the houses were built around the mills. And so we're in a very different position than a lot of our other cities. I'll use LaGrange as an example. They actually they had a meeting where they proposed something similar to us, where it was a special use permit with defined parameters. And at their workshop, they decided that they were going to scrap that and just say that they were going to consider them on a case-by-case basis as they came in. Now, they already have heavy industrial district. We do not. They only have 2 parcels that are actually zoned heavy industrial. And so they, at the time of that meeting. So right after that, after they decided not to include that special use process, just do it on that case-by-case basis, they do have, I believe it's a Google data center coming in. So I do want to be candid to say we have been approached, and the people who are approaching would potentially be interested in doing it through annexation. I don't know whether or not they would be able to do it if they didn't have the annexed property, or if they just want it so that it can be larger. That's the question.
So
there are areas where it could be done.
That zoning is PID.
For Russian.
For Rushtonville. I mean,
How big is the parcel?
It's,
Almost 19.
19. So if that was a proposal, they actually have the room to meet the barrier requirements and everything already.
for a minor.
I
think they've got the
for
time. It would
be a
major.
Yeah, they could do a
Major.
major.
Yeah, could do a major
Over
if they got.
200,000 square feet.
Recommend in that case is to look at the buffer requirement.
Yeah.
And all of the landscaping and everything like that, because it's an existing site, and add that as part of the special use.
Yeah, as the condition. Yeah. So if you didn't hear Michelle, because of that area and where the houses are around there, at that point, we would look and say, what's the biggest need? It's a buffer requirement to help with the sound, with the lighting. And so you could impose an additional condition of increasing that buffer requirement. You could do that through the development agreement to account for the potential noise concerns, because there are residential structures around it. But
I know that was the one, the piece of property that came to mind to me, because it I think it's in my district, but up in my district. But is there any other parcels of property in the city limit that would meet the requirements that's still zoned planned industrial?
not that's zoned, the one that I have in mind is not zoned PID right now.
There's two that I know of on Carver. One is empty, undeveloped. One actually has a building on it. The one that is undeveloped is only 7 acres, so it would only be able to have the minor. The other one across from next to that is bigger, so it could potentially have a major. But I can have GIS pull a list of all of our planned industrial sites within the city and give us an idea of what those sites are, see where those potentially could go.
And keep in mind as well, they could rezone to PID and seek a special use. That is a potential.
I would like to, I don't want to, if we have an opportunity to get an annexation and have a super data center complex put in, that would benefit us as a community and city, I'm not opposed to, and I would hate to, if somebody wanted to annex into the city and it's still being right next to the city.
Yeah.
Without the benefit.
And that's part of our conversation too, so my follow-up to that is, would you, with the UDC rewrite happening within this next fiscal year, because we would close that out and then we would do our comprehensive plan, would you be comfortable with putting into place a data center ordinance so that we can get this into place before the moratorium ends, utilize this while we go through the UDC rewrite process, and speak with our consultants about making that a part of the conversation with our community stakeholders as we navigate putting heavy industrial?
I think that's a good plan.
Okay.
Personally, so.
Thank you so much.
Yep. I like the ordinance language that you sent to us. I think it's pretty well balanced.
Thank you.
I am wary of heavy industrial potentially in the future and its impact on health, safety, and welfare for our community. But as you said, that's a conversation for a little later.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Very thorough. Any questions for anybody?
Mr. Mayor, before you close on this topic,
Yes, sir.
let me just add that this has been one of the most complex issues as far as zoning regulation that I think you've had to face, and frankly, the 40-some-odd years I've represented the city. You declared a moratorium the early part of the year, and staff formed a committee or a team to approach it. And I want to say I think they performed admirably. Michelle and Kelsey kind of led the charge and put it all together. But you've had Brandon, Jennifer, Jason, Jeremy, all working together on this issue. And I think they've come up with a good workable interim solution until we come back next year with the rewrite of the zoning ordinance.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
I've got a family medical issue I got to deal with, so Mr. McCord will take over. Sorry.
All right, we go to item number 3, discuss 2 requests for funding, one from Spalding Collaborative for their general budgetary needs and one from Spalding County for a pilot program with Three Rivers Regional Commission to provide a fixed route bus service during the summer to recreational areas throughout the county.
Good morning. All right, we have 2 different funding requests that we have never received before, and so we have not really had a particular way that we have done this, but I wanted to bring them to you all to get some feedback on how you wanted to handle it. I think I'll swap how it's listed and ask about the counties first, because it's actually in this fiscal year, or part of it would be. And so they have asked that we partner with them on a summer fixed bus route pilot program that Three Rivers Regional Commission would operate. They currently operate the transit services throughout Spalding County, but it is based on a request protocol, and you have to request within or before 24 hours in advance. And this would actually be a fixed route program that would run 6 weeks during the summer of 2026, which would connect residents to 4 key community locations: Ambucks Park, Fairmont Park, City Park, and then the new Spalding County Aquatic Center. It would run Tuesday through Saturday, 8 hours per day for 6 weeks. And I'm not sure that they told us when that would begin, probably depending on funding. They have asked us to split the cost of this 50-50, which would be $20,000 for the city and $20,000 for Spalding County. And I wanted to bring this to you to ask what you wanted to do about that.
Anybody else got anything before I get started?
Go ahead, run it.
It's a lot of money. I mean, it's based on the $40,000. That's $6,000 a week compared just for them to run. And we don't know if they're going to be wanting to charge per ride either, because I know that was one of the things that was in the county commissioners meeting that I listened into one day. Because it originally started out at approximately $34,000 and then said maybe they'll have to charge $2 to $3 per direction. So we don't even know exactly what it's going to be.
This is a kind of sore subject for me. Because initially on, before they put the pool way out there, they had said they had plans about how the children how they were going to get to the pool. But recently I went to the pool. I took my 11-year-old autistic son to the pool. And when I got to the pool, they had the two pools. The small pool where the children I take usually swim was closed off, and it was only available to seniors. And what they said, it was explained to me later, was like medical fragile. And I guess whoever's down there determined who that was. So it was 5 people in that pool. It was on a Saturday. Now the big pool, they said, was it was a party booked, but they had roped off maybe a fourth or less than the pool, and you got about 50 children on people on top of each other. The rest of the pool was not being utilized. They said they were leaving that open for distant swimmer people that, you know. So pretty much they had all these children. It's nowhere to swim. All they could do was kind of stand and play in the water. So when I questioned them about that, they said that was the management. I had gone the day before, and that was not the case. They said they had decided that morning that was how they were going to limit the children to where they could swim. Okay. Also, while I was there was a gentleman that came with about 7 or 8 children. He was not. He was the father of a bunch of the children, but he was not a city resident. So initially, what they were telling these children was that they were using his address, so basically they would not have been considered in school children. So he was going to have to pay for all this. It was a mess. And with them talking about busing and going, around, which, that, like I said, that's kind of sort of thing for me because of the way they've handled everything else. The children have to have someone 18 years old or older with them. Now, if a parent can get them to one of these locations, but they're not there to go to the pool with them, because it has to be someone, if they're under 18, even a 17-year-old, has to have an adult with them in order to swim. For me, them asking us to do this is too vague. They need to tell me something better than what they're telling me about how the pool's going to be utilized before I can agree to, because if you got children 13, 14, 15 years old, they can't get in the pool. And if the parent is working, they can't get in the pool. They're not allowed. If you're under 18 years old, you cannot go in the pool if you don't have someone that's 18 or older with you. So,
do we know who would be like the supervisor over the bus route?
The way that this proposal is worded, it would be Ms. Brantley, Jeannie Brantley with the Three Rivers Regional Commission. She does it now, so she's the transit director.
My thoughts, I'm gonna agree with Ms. Ward. I think it's a little vague. I think we need to have maybe a sit down with Three Rivers and they can explain exactly what it is before we agree or disagree to be a part of this. And also a part of the, if we're not in the recreation business, then it's somewhat of a double taxation issue. And not to go back on what we've already talked about, but that it was, we didn't ask for this. So, anybody else have anything else?
No, I agree about the double taxation issue. I think that may be an issue in this proposal. The only other thing I want to add is the locations. I think it's missing a part of the city that's very important to me, so I would like to see that go up to Tyus Park if we were to go through with a proposal like this.
Good point.
And I guess there is an option for discussion about that because they list 4, but then they say with approximately 5 to 6 designated stop locations planned along the route, so maybe that is an option. The request at this point has been to do a 50-50 partnership, but then also that we could have a joint meeting with the county and the Three Rivers Regional Commission, so I can certainly work on something like that. However, school is out, I think, in about 3 weeks, and it is almost impossible to get all of you together as a board. Are you okay with me reaching out to Dr. Ledbetter and Ms. Brantley to see if I can do something from a staff perspective and then bring that back? Or how do you want to proceed?
Me personally, I want to see some elected officials at the table. I really want to see Ms. Ward, and being that her husband participates a lot with the recreation, I just think she brings a lot of good insight into what's going on. So I would try to schedule it around, and hopefully it's open to commission if we can be there. Anybody that's available to go. So I wouldn't have a problem with it.
So would everybody like me to try and schedule something with all the boards?
Please.
Okay. All right. And just as a side note, you did just approve the regular transit system that we have with Three Rivers at your last meeting for $35,000 for the remainder of this fiscal year. Not sure the timing of that as to why it was just brought to us, but it was. I'm assuming we'll have another one for next fiscal year brought to us very soon, but that is something that we have always done or required to do as their transportation provider for us in this area. All right, moving along, the Spalding Collaborative Budget Proposal is also something new. This would not start until FY27, which is July 1. I received an email back a little before the end of March asking about how to request funding from the city of Griffin. And I had a lot of questions back. This is from Warren East, who's the current, I think, chairperson is his title for the Spalding Collaborative. Mainly, what operations are changing where the collaborative now needs funding from the city? What has been the annual budget for the last 3 years? Do you have copies of your audits? And are you making the same requests of the county? So I do have those answers in addition to the actual budget proposal that you all were sent as well. And not to read them to you, but he does say that there has just been a lot more need from the collaborative. And so the operations are changing in that regard. Not that the operations have changed from what they're doing, they're just sort of expanding in numbers, I think. The annual budget for the last 3 years has been $56,500 in 24, $56,250 in 25, and $56,250 in 26. He did provide the Form 990s, which they actually complete through the school system because they don't have enough of a revenue and expense balance budget to actually have to do an audit. So they did have the 990s that they provided there, and the school system serves as their fiscal agent to report those. And then lastly, they are actually asking for the same amount of funding from the city, the county, and the school board. So they have not requested to support direct service delivery because those programs, services and activities like Backpack for Kids or mentoring or the reentry program, Little Free Libraries, the VOAD and long-term recovery are operated under the umbrella of the Spalding Collaborative, but they're self-supporting through fundraising and grants and donations. So this is mainly sort of their operating budget proposal. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that, and they have said on that budget proposal that the Department of Human Services currently funds the collaborative. That's $56,250. and that is to coordinate the actual collaborative, which are all the services that they provide. So what they are supposed to do is connect partners and community organizations, share data and other information, enhance communication, build capacity, respond to community needs, and link people with community resources. So they don't actually have any of their, yes? Uh-oh.
None of them are coming up.
Okay, well,
It is saying our passwords are out.
Okay. I'm going to keep going while Mike works on that. So one thing that they did point out in their budget proposal request is that in 2017, Spalding County has been leasing the old courthouse property to them for $1 annually, which they have been able to lease to Griffin Waypoint to improve access to veteran benefits and services. They are now in partnership with the county to lease 732 West Broad Street, which was formerly Schneider United Methodist Church, in the same way in which the collaborative is then subleasing that to Griffin Waypoint, where they're continuing to provide veteran access to benefits and services. So they are now coming before us, and they've shared what their budget is. $201,500 is the proposed budget in different position requests. So the executive director, chief operating officer, IT specialist, and executive support. Operating expenses total $14,043. And then software is $2,652 for a grand total of $218,195. The funding that they received from the Department of Human Services is that $56,250. So the balance is $161,945, which divided by 3 comes out to about $54,000 that they are requesting from the city, the county, and the school system. I do not know if the county and the school system have said yes or no to the proposal. Will Doss, who is a member of the collaborative, is here, and he can answer any questions if there are anything further from that.
Anybody got any questions, comments?
Yeah, I got a comment.
Go ahead.
I don't have a problem with us supporting the collaborative. I know they need the money and they've done a lot of things. But the one thing that I want to have a clear understanding about, everything, they touched on everything that they do everywhere. But where, for me, there is a lapse in where the collaborative work is a mechanism to, I know the judge is there, the police department, the sheriff, everybody's there. But the last meeting I went to, one of the things that all these organizations are just kind of skirting around is the issue with gang problems in our community. What I would like to see, we talked about re-entry, we talked about homelessness, we talked about all, but gang violence is an epidemic. It's really something that nobody actually is saying. The people that are most vulnerable are children from like age maybe 10, 11 to 15.
Middle school.
And there's a breakdown where when they do something, they don't lock them up, they put them back on the street, but there's nothing in place to try to help do anything. So I would like to see that become an integral part of the collaborative for whomever we can get to do something or a program or work with all the mechanism to help it's there. It's just that I don't know if they're scared to talk about it or what it is, but to come up with a mechanism to support, get resources for any organization or organizations that works with the police sheriff department to target and try to figure out how we can help this segment of children in our community. The children are being enticed into these gangs they're at an age where they don't really understand that when they're committing themselves, they're endangering themselves, because you can't just go in and say, well, I'm tired, I'm not going to do this no more. So even when they start to try to pull away, they're in more danger then than they are when, before they come in. So I just want to see something that's going to help that segment of our community. But other than that, what the collaborative does is awesome, and I know that they need the monetary support, and I don't have a problem with it. I just want to make sure that where my community is most vulnerable and there's most need, that we don't continue to just ignore it.
Anyone else? Any more comments?
What I would like to see from this proposal is, instead of an even three-way split between the different government entities, we have a more dynamic pricing with some reasoning based on services provided and things like that, for how much is from each government body.
So,
Any suggestions on how you want to do that?
Well, to be honest, I'm not super familiar with the collaborative, so I would just like to see, based on who they service and things that they do, how much each government is impacted, and then also based on the size of the budgets from each government, how much it would even make sense to provide.
Mr. Wright?
I've already brought my questions up already about they were asking for half instead of a third, and Ms. O'Connor already addressed that one.
What do you mean they was asking?
They were asking for 80,000.
No, I messed that up. He called it, and I had put 80 in the, because it said they were splitting, and I
Splitting
missed the
in
school
thirds,
system.
so she'd
I was
already-
thinking the 50-50 from the county proposal, but it was the third, so it's the
Third.
54.
She already took care of that, my question.
So have y'all gone before the county and the school board to see what they're willing to do?
So yes, we have had this type of conversation. It has not gone before as far as the budget vote, because no one has done that yet. We have gotten favorable response from the county and the school system, both. And so answering those questions, I think only other thing to remind you of is the $20,000 that you have been paying for Archway into that process. This would allow the collaborative to be the oversight and be able to provide that same service that has been happening. So it technically could be looked at as only a $34,000 increase rather than a $54,000 increase.
Okay.
So whatever the other program was, we talked about doing other than Archway.
So right now, we actually are considered in the Connected Resilient Community Program, which is your sort of step out of Archway. We have a retreat scheduled for May 11th, which you were all supposed to receive an invitation for, to determine how, when we graduate from Archway, what are we going to do next? How are we going to sustain that locally? The suggestion that we have talked about during executive committee is to have the collaborative have the person work for them to say, this is who sort of keeps going with that intergovernmental collaboration. They're already the ones that do the resources, find the resources for the need that needs to be met. And actually looking at this, I'm on the committee that's helping draft the job description for that position. And a lot of the same wording that the Archway professional had is what they've used in this budget proposal. So I think it does fit. I've told y'all a couple of different times, like Commissioner Fuller, I'm not that familiar with the collaborative. I haven't really participated in any of their meetings before, so I'm becoming familiar as they have continued to come up in our discussions over the last 6 months or so. So Will is right. We will graduate from Archway hopefully in that first week in July, or in between July 4th and July 11th, and make that a big community celebration during that time. And so we won't have that $20,000 budgeted for Archway, and instead we could use that, plus we'd have to budget $34,000 in addition to meet that budget request if that's what we wanted to do. I need to know that like today, because we're closing the budget book to balance that, and we've got to make a decision if we want to have that in the budget, or if you still have questions about it and want to see how that retreat goes, we plugged in the $20,000 for Archway just as a placeholder, and if we wanted to then say, yes, we're comfortable with it after the fact, we could use contingency money that is always budgeted to pay that other 34 for this next fiscal year. We don't have that decision made before then.
I'm good with it.
I'm good with it.
Taking the 20,000 plus the 34.
That'll work.
Yep.
Okay, so the 54 as in the budget as the request.
Yes.
Okay, that is it for me then.
Do we have anything from anyone else before we go into executive session? Being none, consider executive session pursuant to OCGA section 50-14-3B, 1B, for the purpose of authorizing negotiations to purchase, dispose of, or lease property, and pursuant to OCGA section 50-14-2-1, for the purpose of consulting and meeting with legal counsel pertaining to pending or potential litigation, settlement claims, administrative proceedings, or other judicial actions brought or to be brought by or against the agency or any officer or employee, or in which the agency or any officer or employee may be directly involved. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Move, second.
Motion by Ms. Ward, second by Mr. Wright. All in favor, signify by raising your hand. Get out. Oh, you doing the minutes? Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Hey, that's good.
Let's go see what we're going down now.
Good questions there.
I think I got everything.
Now I got to go home and clean up the house. I got kids coming over. I got to go pick up some kids from school for a friend of ours.
Look at this.
I'll call back.
I'll wait till
What time is it? 12 o'clock?
12 o'clock.
Oh my God, I was kidding. 12 o'clock?
Yeah.
Crazy.
All right, I entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So
We
moved.
got a motion from Ms. Curtis, second by Commissioner Fuller. All in favor signify by saying aye or bye.
Bye.
Aye and bye.